Good evening, everybody. Welcome to School Psych Podcast. Very happy to be here tonight. Hope that everyone is enjoying themselves and transitioned well back from winter break and is getting back into the groove of things. But we're very excited to have Dr. Heidi Jacobs here to talk to us about a couple different things, but on curriculum and some things that are a little bit out of my comfort zone. I'm in mostly the testing type of job right now, so I'm really excited to be learning a lot. But anyways, I'm Rachel. I'm a school psychologist. I'm working in the state of Maryland. I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca. I'm a school psychologist working in the state of Connecticut, and I want to remind you guys how to participate. Tonight, you can comment right next to our video screen if you're watching through YouTube. I'll be looking for those comments to share, questions, comments, ideas, thoughts. Also on School Psych, Your School Psychologist on Facebook, or the School Psych Podcast page, of course, on Facebook, or on Twitter using the hashtag #PsychedPodcast. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Tonight, in preparation for our podcast, we asked you guys, we took a little poll, a very unscientific poll, to try to find out in which ways you were able to affect a positive school climate, and how you're involved in selecting and implementing social emotional learning curricula in your schools. We discovered that most of us use Tier 1 interventions for PBIS programs that we have in our school, positive behavior interventions and supports. Also, the second favorite choice was creating Tier 2 interventions for social emotional learning, so smaller groups, specific interventions. Also helping teacher teams select social emotional learning curriculum that goes along with the general academic curriculum. That was our third favorite. Some of us research and choose social emotional learning curriculum for grade level implementation. Some of us create and implement several different types of Tier 1 interventions throughout the year for social emotional learning in our schools. Some of us collect data on the SEL interventions that are being used. A couple of us involved in anti-bullying programs. Some are responsible or in charge of selecting the curriculum for the school, so more of an administrative role there. And a couple of us use social emotional learning in individual counseling. So we have a wide variety of different roles and how we are involved in curriculum, and specifically social emotional learning curriculum. And the one other thing that I wanted to mention too is in our NAS practice model, one of the areas of expertise for school psychologists is in this realm. And I think that often many of us, like Rachel, get put into the testing psychometrician kind of role in our schools, and it may not be the best way to fully use all of our training and skills. And I think that if the more we can learn about these interventions and the more we can take leadership roles towards these goals in our schools, the better we can do for our kids. So I'm excited to find out from Dr. Jacobs more about that. And now Anna has joined us from a new computer. Hi, Anna.
Hi, sorry, I'm a few minutes late. Technical difficulties on top of technical difficulties.
No problem. Nice to have you.
Great to be here.
So, Rachel, you're going to introduce our guest.
Oh, right. I'm going to give a whirl. I'm always, I'm not as good as Anna. When I'm ready now. I'll hope to do you a little bit of justice, Dr. Jacobs. But Dr. Heidi Hayes Jacobs, creator of Curriculum 21, is also the founder and president of Curriculum Designers Incorporated. Heidi has served as an education consultant to thousands of schools nationally and internationally. She works with schools and districts on K through 12 on issues and practices pertaining to creating 21st century learning environment, upgrading curriculum mapping, and strategic planning. Numerous articles that have appeared in professional journals. Heidi is the author of see it. I messed up my spot here, so I knew I was going to botch this. Here we go. Heidi is the author of many books, including the Curriculum Mapping Planner, Templates and Tools for Effective Professional Development, co-authored with Ann Johnson, and Curriculum 21, Essential Education for a Changing World, which was selected as the worldwide member book by ASCD. And her newest book, Bold Moves for Schools, How We Create Remarkable Learning Environments, co-authored with Marie Hubley-Alcock. So welcome. We are so excited to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
So, Dr. Jacobs, can you tell us a little bit more in detail about kind of the scope of your work and what you're interested in talking about with schools, with teachers and administrators lately?
I can sure try, and I want to thank you all for inviting me to participate. My life's work has been about the design of learning experiences for students K through 12 and on the college level as well, and for adult learners, that is designed to be engaging and relevant and meaningful to prepare our students for now and into the future. And I developed a model called curriculum mapping. That first model was released in 1997, and over the last few decades has evolved and developed, and software companies support it, and it has been a really absorbing and exciting part of my work. In that, we collaborate to use a software platform to design experiences vertically that align and work year to year and align to our missions and what is important. But the curriculum isn't static, that it breathes. A lot of people think of curriculum as a textbook. A textbook's not a curriculum. A textbook's a textbook. It's what you do with it. It's how you work with it. However, what's happened to me, and I must say is I think, I hope timely for you, is by working so many years of my life on the design of curriculum and making it a exciting and meaningful experience for teachers to do and kids to enjoy, one thing that's become very clear to me is that most of what has been taught is really dated. Mm-hmm. That it isn't just about having a digital tool. I have a book series that was released about 2 years ago with Solution Tree, 4-book series on the new literacies: digital literacy, media literacy, global literacy, and how to lead them, because you have a new type of learner. And I often see curriculum that's written, but is preparing kids for roughly 1990, maybe 1980. Sure. And I'm not trying to be facetious here. I mean, I can have a computer and do dated work. It's not just the tools, it's the content of what kids engage in. And one thing that it makes it so relevant to your audience and to you is that it's somewhat diminishing for a student to be in an environment where they feel like they're time traveling backwards. Mm. And I think it makes them angry. I think it makes them bored. I think they get frustrated. Yeah. And, you know, in a way, we have a different type of learner. We have a lot of what we've always kept that's classical, and I think we want to keep. But I think there's a lot we have to shift to. So a big part of my work has been, curricular-wise, has been answering 3 questions. What do we cut? Because we can't keep teaching everything. What are we going to keep? Because there's things that are working, that are real important. Fundamentals, both in academic and in effective socio-emotional relationships. Those are things we need. But we also have to look at what we got to create, because we have a new kind of learner. And the way we set up relationships has altered a little bit, and quite a bit, actually. And so I think those have been part of what I'm doing. But to pull it to the new book, I started off thinking that I wanted to work on going even deeper in those questions with my colleague Marie. And then the further we got into it, we realized it wasn't enough. It's not enough to talk about modernizing curriculum and assessment, I might add. And we can talk about testing. I think that's an important piece. People teach to what's tested, what's evaluated. But it was not enough. We had to look at other questions. And I started to look at learning environments, architecture, physical environments, and schedules, which are really old. And people sometimes say they're updating their schedule. They're not. They just, they add 20 minutes here or there. And I'm talking significant shifts.
Yeah.
The way we group our kids, which is still 19th century. Grade level grouping is still a 19th century model.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense now. And the way we group the adults, how siloed we are, departments in high schools. You can pick out people in a department because they're together all the time. The rarest meeting in an American high school is for everybody who teaches 9th grade to be in a room together.
Mm-hmm.
They're together so much they dress alike. I mean, they have to be careful. Same thing in elementary. That it wasn't enough to simply look at curriculum. We had to look at shifts in major ways to learning environments and how they're organized. And so that's kind of a response. You asked me 2 questions. One, what's the context of my work over time and what interests me and what I'm engaged in now? And so that puts some of the things on the table, I hope.
There's so much in there that you just said that sparks thoughts and questions for me. The first one is about creating curriculum that kids can relate to. So much of social emotional learning is, self-awareness. How does the student understand themselves in relation to what they're learning? And then social awareness in the context of the classroom environment and the classroom group. How is the student's awareness of relationships in the room affecting what they're learning? And then, sort of self-management and pro-social skills. How do I take this, what I'm learning, and apply it to my life or my goals or my purpose? And so that's sort of a whole canopy of social emotional learning and how I see it as related to academic curriculum. But what you were saying about how all of those pieces related to the curriculum have changed so much over time. And so in my work, I spend a lot of time working with kids, small groups on, you might call them social skills and social communication. How do I have a conversation with my friend when we disagree? How do we disagree civilly? And how do we form an argument and make an argument? How do I say how I feel? How do I know how I feel? All those things are the same in many ways as they've always been, but because of technology and the way kids communicate today, they're also very, very different. Communication is very, very fast. There's not a lot of time to think about what you're tweeting or what you're saying or what you're texting, and then the analysis of those messages is different and more complicated. So all of that was in my mind as you were talking, but what I'm wondering about is in your idea, you have a vision and some action steps in your book, Bold Moves for Schools, and I'm wondering what it will take to really create contemporary learning environments to meet the demands of the 21st century society, to engage learners, to produce students who are prepared to succeed in this modern world. You mentioned a couple of radical shifts, different groupings and scheduling. Do you see small steps towards those radical changes, or do you think that we need to kind of start over and build back up? But I also, related but down the road, have one other idea. Do you think that in your talk that I shared on Facebook, you mentioned that mission-driven schools are more powerful and valuable than sort of standard-driven or core curriculum-driven schools? And that made me wonder how you feel about charter schools, the charter school system versus public education. So I know I just threw out a ton of different things, but maybe just take one that interests you.
Let me give you some feedback. You threw out a ton of things.
Yeah, sorry.
Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. I think that's how ideas fold. I don't think things are always neat and little packages, so I actually appreciated them. If I could, I'd like to, what I heard, I want to respond in a way that I think will make the most sense. Because you did ask a lot, but I liked it. I mean, we're having fun here and that's good, but I like that you could see the connections. First of all, let's back up just a little bit to where you started.
Sure.
You mentioned your work and how you help students interact more effectively with one another. To me, that's a classical and critical set of skills that I'm going to use anywhere. I'm going to need it with my little brother or my big sister. I'm going to need it with my husband. I'm going to need it with my kids. I'm going to need it with my colleagues. I think those are always going to be with us, and they're personal and intimate. However, here's another thought. I would argue one of the reasons we often have so many problems in so many of our schools is because of the way schools are organized. I think it's a petri dish for problems. When you have 40 minutes with a group of kids and you have 25 kids in a room who are adolescents, middle school kids, they're a little distracted anyway, don't you think? Just by virtue of their age. And you have a teacher who is upfront using a model of pedagogy that's 200 years old. Receptacle and dispenser. You kids just sit there and I'm giving it out. And we're surprised when students act out, and especially if it goes right past them. Especially if it really isn't relevant. Especially when it's coverage. And it's especially true if I struggle anyway with, say, language skills. That it goes right past because I really don't understand the words. And we wonder why they have emotional problems. It's kind of amazing to me we don't have more than we do. And then you have the students who are high performers, who may have parents who are like hovercraft around them, putting pressure on them. And one of the things I hear in higher performing school districts all the time is how teachers actually really try to create creative experiences. But the kids too often are saying, no, just let me get by. I just want to get through this. I just want a good grade. I don't want to take any chances. It's a compliance-driven kind of culture. And the curriculum is drive-by, let's get through it. I find the majority of teachers I work with don't want it that way. There are certainly some that aren't terrific at engagement, but most people would like to do a better job. However, when you step back and you look at the conditions people work in, and that in fact the schedule was designed in the latter part of the 1800s at Saratoga Springs, New York, when the Committee of 15 met, National Committee, and said there will be a 6-hour day with 7 to 8 subjects, and it will be a school year based on the agrarian calendar, and we still have it. And we move kids through on predetermined groups and grade levels when we know actually there's a range of kids out there in any class. And we have a one-room schoolhouse model in the majority of our elementary schools. One teacher, all subjects, supposed to be great with all the kids. And then at the end of the year, just as you know them, you hand them off cold to somebody new. If I were trying to design a way to have a lot of kids not do well, this is it. It's a winner. So at this stage of my life and career, I feel like life is short. You got to put it out there. You use the word radical, and I'm glad you did, because the root word of radical in math means root. That's what it means. It doesn't mean wild. It means root. It means getting to the root. And so I would say I don't like to ever be introduced as a school reformer, and I'm grateful that you didn't do that, because I don't believe in school reform. I think that's the problem. School reform is, let's tweak this a little bit. Let's change the way we group kids a little bit. I think we really do need bold, courageous, bigger steps, and it's happening. It is starting to happen. It is, and I'm happy to see that there's now an enormous amount of work, and it's in different pockets of the country. You are seeing it with groups like the XQ schools that just were awarded through Apple. You're seeing it through American Association of School Administrators with their consortium for innovation and transformation. These are superintendents committed to asking this question: what would happen if you held schools accountable for innovation? That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? You're beginning to see some shifts, and you are also seeing a lot of people not doing this. I get it. I'm not I'm experienced. I do see that. But there's an interesting desire to make these moves, and they are moves, because otherwise we just keep staying in a circle and we're not going to go anywhere. Let me just say this too. You asked some very interesting questions I want to parse out briefly about small moves versus big moves. I don't know if that's really, I know what you're getting at, and I appreciate your intention, but I don't think that's really the point. The point here is to have bold vision and sensible moves, but to move. To not fall back on what we've done before. There's an old axiom, what do we want kids to know and be able to do? I'm sure you've heard that.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is we're restricted by what we know and are able to do. So I think the first part of a bold move is to not jump so quickly to like, oh, well, this is how we'll fix it. Because then people tweak their schedule. Or this is how we'll do it, is to start to look at a larger degree of genuine design thinking. And yeah, a mission-driven school is going to do better if the mission is a modern one. I mean a real one, a real modern, how do you prepare kids for what they need 5-10 years from now? Because I would say arguably we don't. What kind of learning environment will be requisite to make that happen? Probably one of the best signs of this is in the PL stuff, the personalized learning work, which is not individualized instruction. It's very different. I have a model in the book that I did with Marie on, we shaped as a quest-based piece where we're looking at having both richer, more elegant, better written curriculum experiences and a better environment in our classrooms, in our learning environments, but also concurrently providing individual students with an opportunity to carry out a long-term inquiry of their own creation. I don't think it's either or. I think we need both. And I think those are positive signs. I have a lot of schools you could look at. If you go on my website, which is curriculum21.com, you can go to the clearinghouse. And in the clearinghouse, there's a series of tags you can find where next to where it says show. And in it there's one where it says innovative programs. And I keep posting programs that give people make it really exciting to consider where they want to go and what are possibilities. So yeah, it takes time, but I think it starts with an innovation design team. I'm working with many school districts right now where we're doing that. We literally have changed the language. It's a task force or a group that is looking at both the short term and long term. This very month, I will be working in California and in Texas with some schools involved in this type of work. I'm actually working in Connecticut with some schools that are making these same shifts, and certainly in New York, and I could start to go through the country now as I go through in Florida, different places. And people begin by raising these questions and begin by reshaping their mission so that it will infiltrate the schools and the programs. It's slow, steady work. Some places have jump-started faster. Quick response to your question about charters. I really would, again, I'm often asked this, and I have a lot of trouble with a question like that. Not the spirit of your question, I get it. But it would be like when somebody says, what do you think's better, public or private? I'm going, what are you talking about? There's great schools, and there's some schools that need work, and it's not generic. And I can tell you right now, I am currently working with some amazing charters. I just love them. Can I also say that a place that's a charter that's seeking out people who are engaged in upgrading school, whether it's me or Mike Fisher or Sylvia Tolosano, I don't care who it is, they're already into becoming the best they can be. There are some charters that are not effective. I think what's unfortunate is that politically, charters have been pitted against their public school counterparts, which are public schools. And in a way, I think public charter schools are permission schools. They've been given permission to be highly responsive. I frankly think all public schools should be charter schools. That if all of our schools had a commitment, they create a charter, a mission, and they had more room, more leeway to be highly responsive to their kids, you'd see some very exciting responses. But what's happened, it's become a political football. That I don't like. So that would be quick response to a complicated question, I guess.
Yeah, that's
Let me
great.
stop here. But you asked a lot of questions. I hope I got to some of them.
I think you did, for sure.
Yeah, as you were talking too, I was thinking, I go into, and I've worked in a couple different districts before, and when I go into a new one, I often come across, procedures that I'm like, why do we do it this way? And the response that I kind of get is, well, because we've always just done it that way. We don't really have a good reason. And that's just kind of what sprung to my mind when you're talking about all these things that you don't even talk about, just like, or think about just how you group kids and grade levels and things. That, why do we do it that way? Because we've always done it.
In a way, in the book, there's 2 laws of physics that I cite. And one of the laws of physics is that form should follow function. But you see, in schools, form leads function. We teach to the form, the structure we have. We go, oh, I have 40 minutes, so I can only do 40 minutes worth of work. What if we changed it? And I'm realistic. I'm not saying you can do everything you want, but what if we were to say, gee, what type of uses of time would really help our specific student population? Not generic. Let's say we have 2/3 of our kids are second language learners, and we're a highly transient school. People are coming and going. We're in an urban environment. You should come up with a schedule and grouping your kids in a way that matches who they are, as opposed to this is the form called school, plug them in. And see, to me, part of what happens is a lot of people in your field are kind of the last hope for some of these kids. And I go and I step back and I'm like, this is just really, there's something that just doesn't make sense here. And it isn't that there are restrictions. I realize people have start times and end times, though I think that could be looked at because we also have virtual learning possibilities. They're asynchronous too. Mm-hmm. But there should be larger questions about how can we use physical space. Well, one of my favorite things when I do keynotes and do a lot of presentations is I start with architecture from around the world that is mind-blowing what people are doing with physical spaces, because it's the physicalization of these ideas. It's the majority of these places, they don't use the word classroom anymore. There's forum rooms and seminar rooms. There's Da Vinci labs. And it's amazing what's coming up. And they aren't expensive, which is a different way of thinking of space. So it's not to just change for change's sake. Change is always going on. The one thing you can count on is impermanence. Nothing's going to stand still. It's that we still hold on to the vestiges and the habits, which I think you were inferring, of this is the way school is and I have to learn it. The second rule of physics is the whole is the sum of the parts. So I would say there's the 4 structures that have to be revised, modernized, and like I say, I don't want reform, I'm into new forms of school. But there's 4 structures that have to be done concurrently, and that's the other problem. Is people work on one at a time very quickly. It's the use of learning spaces, physical and virtual. Second is schedules, long-term, short-term, asynchronous, synchronous. How we group learners, not just by grade level or age band, though that could be a possibility. But there are a lot of different ways you can group kids. And the third is the grouping of, or fourth, pardon me, is the grouping of the personnel, multiple personnel configurations. How do we group our teachers? We do it by role, as opposed to necessarily even by talent. There's some real interesting things going on that seem to me to be much more contemporary. And if you look at business, you look at what's happened with how Google has changed the working spaces where employees work and the way they handle time. It's been really productive. You look at what Apple did. They turned retail marketing on its ear when they made the first Apple stores. You go in and you're met by, what do they call them? A genius. Show you that everybody's active. I'm telling you, you see the notion of stepping back and creating contemporary formats to match contemporary workers at Google, contemporary consumers at Apple. And when I look at school, it's all 19th, not even 20th century structures. 19th century structures, fundamentally a 20th century curriculum. The content isn't all that modern. That's another point. But you got 21st century kids. So no wonder you got your hands full.
Absolutely. That also makes me think of so many things. The one is there's been all this really terrific research on so-called non-cognitive skills. So how things like grit and self-control and creativity are as predictive of success, or sometimes more predictive of certain kinds of successes than academic skill or IQ tests or general ability, and how we can try in our academic goal, in our teaching goals, to try to infuse some of this learning. So learning about the self, you know, where is my attention right now and how can I refocus it, or how gritty am I? How much perseverance do I have? And if I want to have more, how do I get there? Those kinds of non-academic or non-cognitive lessons infused into our curriculum. So if I'm learning about history, how can I do both those things in my classroom? And the grouping of adults. One of my favorite things to do is push in and do a joint lesson with a teacher. So if a teacher's teaching whatever, the literature on this, and the literature is a great example of an idea about creativity. This person was very creative, or this person was very courageous, sort of character traits. And if I can build in a character social emotional lesson along with the literature, I always find that very powerful. And I'd love to see more of that. I happen to work in a school with a lot of permission, as you said. It's an independent private school. So I think that gives us more flexibility. But I'd love to see our public schools have that kind of flexibility, to have the adults say, here's what would be best for my kids at this moment with this lesson or with this curriculum. Sounds...
Yeah, let me just say one quick thing, the thing you said at the end. I know I respect where you work. I get that you have that. But again, I want to just take a slightly different angle. I work in a lot of independent schools where there isn't any permission. So I just would be careful of that. And I also think some of the most innovative and interesting work I'm seeing are in public schools. If you take a look at probably one of the most fascinating and successful personalized learning projects I've seen, it's in Charlotte Mecklenburg. I mean, it's a huge public school district. They're really making this happen, and they're so responsive. Or if you were to go to South Fayetteville, or you look at the innovation lab over in Greenwich, I mean, you know, you've got. I think the point here is what you're talking about, what you are appreciating in your own school environment is something you'd like to see more of. That I appreciate. I think in a podcast in particular, I just like to be thoughtful from my point of view on those kinds of points. Getting to the more important issue, I think, which you raised, which is really a great point, Rebecca, is in a sense where is the role of, or how do we cultivate socio-emotional learning and dispositions, which is the bigger phrase that's used right now. My dear colleague, Benna Kalik, and her colleague, Art Costa, developed Habits of Mind almost, I think, a little over 20 years ago. And there have been multiple books, and that program is used all over the world. And they looked at the 16 habits, and they look at this notion of cultivating those dispositions as integral. And it is. You know, I think in a funny way, it's funny because I think that people do try to dichotomize cognitive from affective, whereas if I'm intellectually curious, it's a kind of a marriage between these two words, that we should be much more deliberate in using language in schools that does, in fact, cross-reference what this is. So if we're looking at, we want you to be a critical thinker, which is used, I think, really loosely, would be another thing to do persistent analysis. If I start to take phrases, say, for example, of this idea of controlling impulsivity, which is one of the areas you work on, and it's one of the habits of mind, but I would be looking at unconditional listening and thoughtful response. I need those for cognitive functioning. If I look at cognitive skills and I begin to deliberately marry them as opposed to look at them as separate, I think I'm going to do a better job. The other thing is that if students don't feel safe emotionally and physically safe in a academic classroom, they can't express themselves academically. No, they can't show the work. So I think that part of this shift is what we're talking about right now in modernizing schools is very much about this notion. It's fascinating to me that there's been now quite a number of studies on the impact of formal meditation at schools, of thoughtfulness and mindfulness work that maybe 15 years ago, eyebrows might have been raised. It isn't anymore. Yoga is offered in many of the high schools and private schools I work with, isn't it? And it's not religion per se at all. It deals with, though there could be a relationship to it, certainly, and that's not to diminish that at all. It's just the idea is that when a student feels centered or more aware of themselves, they can function better, they're calmer, they can be more thoughtful, that the combination is one thing I think that would be important. I get a little concerned when all this is stratified. That I understand the necessity to perhaps have programs where you do formal study of certain habits. I mean, I've seen Benna and Art do this beautifully. I can appreciate that work. And I think the key is, what will that look like in my class? So if I want students to show grit, what does grit mean? What does that look like? Does grit mean that you go back after you've made some errors on a essay and you redo it and you stick with it and you'll do it again and again? Students know what grit looks like in athletics. They do. They need to know what it looks like when they're involved in a discussion of something like A Dream Deferred, Langston Hughes. They need to know what reflective and thoughtful responses look like in a discussion of our current political situation, where tempers are up and feelings go deep and it can get very emotional. And how do you get yourself to slow down and listen? What will that look like in a social studies class? What does it look like for a first grader to think of somebody besides themselves and to be, ongoing and courteous and share, and whether it's materials or share ideas, and that sometimes these things can be taught in tandem quite well. I think there's a lot of portals into your work in schools, and some of it is formal curricular. But one of the examples you gave, Rebecca, I liked a lot, was how, through the vehicle, sometimes it's the other way around. If I'm engaged with students and we're reading a really powerful book, say it's something like The Giver, Lois Lowry, could be 5th or 6th grade. It could be This Side of Paradise, F. Scott Fitzgerald. It could be a book by Jane Yolen. It could be a book by Judy Blume. It could be, Fudge. It could be any of those books. There's an emotional richness in those stories, and to make the connection is real important. To personalize that connection is a great opportunity to cultivate it. But it's true in other classes too. It's not just literature. It's not only the humanities. I think there's possibilities for being deliberate. I think there's possibilities for grit, in persistence, in getting myself to know those multiplication tables. I think that there's an ability to stand up for yourself when you don't understand a problem in calculus, that there's self-esteem involved there. That to me, the portal in can be from the curriculum, the academic curriculum, into socio-emotional. It can be directly social, emotional instruction, but I think the key is for it to engage. The kids need to engage it in their ongoing lives in and out of school and what it looks like. I don't think they see it very often. I don't think they necessarily see it. But if we were looking at our students who do well academically and are also risk takers, real thinkers, they show so many of the qualities that you want to have happen. And you know, that's what sometimes get missed. You know, this student is our valedictorian, but let's get at what were the qualities and dispositions we can learn from this person. Just some thoughts.
Do you have any advice for school psychologists, maybe based on, you know, schools you've consulted in, or just based on the idea of modernizing schools? You know, where do you think our role could be, or anything you think we could sort of target?
Well, I think one thing that's important is that we have, and we write about it in our book, that we have a book, the very first part of the book is on new pedagogy, because I think that's what's been missing. And instead of just jumping immediately to, hey, let's try some digital tools, to really start to be more aware of different roles. And I think that changes not only the student's role, but it changes our job description. So if we have students who need to be, I think, better self-navigators and better professional learners. Let me explain what I mean here, is that in the past, the idea that I gave kids information and they received it has changed very much. That a student can hop onto the internet, they can take their iPhone and be anywhere within seconds, but I don't think they know where they're driving. Right? I do not think the majority of kids in America are digitally literate. They're digital users, but they don't know where they're going. You know, they really don't. And part of it is being literate isn't just accessing a language. I mean, I can technically read French, Romanian, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese because they all have the same phonemes as English, but I'm not literate in those languages. So being able to access the internet doesn't make me literate. I have to help kids be able to navigate without me, to be a professional learner, to know how to find information on their own. So if they're going to be self-navigating and professionally literate, guess what? I do too. I would say counselors who are much more savvy with newer tools and more literate themselves are going to be able to communicate better and are going to be much more effective with the new type of learner. I think new students, another role is they have to be social contractors. This is huge for psychologists and counselors. Every time I have a Twitter following, and anytime I post on Twitter, I've made a contract to my followers, and the people I follow have made a contract to me. And, you know, we can talk about the issues of cyberbullying and I think we should, don't get me wrong. But you see, that's just breaking through the idea of a contract. That I want students to know how to network effectively. I want them to be able to use the new tools, but the social and emotional skills and strengths necessary to make good contracts and make good decisions are critical. And if a counselor or a teacher doesn't know how to make use of these networks themselves, they are not going to be able to communicate with these kids. It's just going to be drive-by, and the kids are going to roll their eyes because this is right now work. It doesn't mean, I mean, I'm a real believer in using these tools. I really am, and a lot of my work is helping people do this. I keep learning all the time. I don't claim to know all this. Here's a couple others that I think are important. I think we need students who are media critics and good media makers, quality media makers. And I don't think our students have had almost minimal attention, public, private, I don't care where it is. In America, we don't study media literacy. We don't. And I'm talking all the rectangles, television, film, computers. Kids haven't studied formally television and film, and occasionally there'll be an elective. There's a snowy day they put on a movie. It's usually Frozen or one of those Disney movies. I mean, you know, they're good. But how easily manipulated are we as a population? And we really are. And kids go to a browser and they just take the first thing that comes out. That's like going into a library and say, oh, I'll just take the first book. That to be a knowledgeable and create a powerful citizenry where people can stand up for themselves, you have to be a good critic. And then I think quality media making and is an opportunity for sharing and in really great ways. But I think running around and posting a film on YouTube as a first draft, it's not a final documentary. And we want to work on those things. And I'd like to see your school psychologists explore resources, create their own version of a kind of Khan Academy or counseling academy. Here's some advice, here's some places to go. I think the other is to be globally connected, that the world is bigger than our schools and our kids tend to be quite isolated, and I think our school staff has to be expansive and make connections. It can be really liberating for kids. And then finally, I think I'm into students need to be innovative designers and to be willing to take risks and come up with long-term solutions, and teach, I think, a psychologist who can begin to think that way, to design a program, design learning experiences, but also to be thoughtful will be, I think, a more contemporary type of leader. They should explore applications and tools by all means. That I have a clearinghouse. I think all schools need them. It's interesting. Last year I was invited by American Association of School Librarians to do a keynote for their national group, and they asked me, what does a contemporary librarian look like? And I really thought about it, and I started to put together some resources, and I was thinking of the type of physical environment that needs to change. And school libraries are starting to change dramatically, and it isn't just a big room with more pillows. It's not that kind of thing. You know, why are we using spaces? I'm not sure about school psychology and counseling, but I bet you there's some interesting things to begin to explore. I would be looking at new innovations, not just for their own sake, but what we know and what we've learned, and begin to look at deepening my professional take and becoming much more familiar with a new kind of learner, because that's what we've got.
I love all that you just said. I think that was really awesome. I mean, that makes me think too. I mean, all of us, we go to school and we go to grad school, and, you know, time passes and things change, and and it's so important to stay connected and to know what's going on and to stay relevant. And I think that social media is often a good way to do that. And my husband's a teacher, and I see him on Twitter and doing Twitter chats and watching educator podcasts and whatnot. And I feel that teachers, school psychologists, counselors, everyone can stand to learn a whole lot more than what they learned in grad school just by talking with each other and having this conversation.
Well, isn't that what you're doing right now? I mean, isn't that what this program's about? Is connecting people who are like-minded or aren't, for that matter, and providing a forum for them to interact. And that's great. I mean, I think it really is. I think if I were a school psychologist, I think it would be very easy to feel isolated. And, in a school, I mean, I'm not saying people always are, that's not true. But unlike some of your colleagues who are in departments where there are a lot of other people, often people who have role-specific responsibilities can be isolated. And I think a network of other people would be very important, but also to look at that model. I mean, I also think it's a bit of a problem. I'd like to see more embedded work, frankly, and then part of that would be how we grew up kids. I'd also like to see school psychologists teaching more, frankly. I just would. No, I would. I'd like to see them more involved in professional development.
Yeah, and I know that Rebecca, in her role, is in the classroom a lot and is able to do that. I know that a lot of us wish that we would be given more freedom to do just that. So I think that's yay.
Well, it's just been really great. I've really enjoyed my time with you. And
thank you so much.
I don't know if you had any other questions, but I really want to, I'm not just saying this because you invited me. It's a good idea. And I'm really tickled to be invited. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We want to be very respectful of your time. I actually have 8 billion other questions, but
wrong ones.
for email. We really appreciate your time. This has been so interesting and thought-provoking and inspiring. And I know that my director of curriculum at work has your stack of books on her desk, so I will be sneaking one of those away soon. And probably will reach out to you, Dr. Jacobson, email if you don't mind.
Oh, please do. And thanks again. It's been a wonderful hour with you all. And I wish you the best and in your work, and keep this up. It's terrific.
Thank you so much.
Very, very nice praise. All right. I'm not sure when our next episode is. I want to say in another 2 weeks or so, but we will be posting. So keep your eye out on the Facebook group and Twitter and all that good stuff. And are we seeing, I'm looking for last minute questions or anything. I know that the people have been chatting and just basically kind of agreeing with everything that's being said, and really just fantastic. We have somebody who said that they'd be curious about Dr. Jacobs' ideal school.
Oh,
Do you have an ideal?
Really interesting. You know, I've been asked that a lot of different ways. One time I was at a meeting at the college board. I was on an advisory group a few years ago. And there was a gentleman on the group who was not an educator, because they brought in people from different fields. It was good. And he said, Heidi, what do you think? What is the ideal school? Have you been to a school that you would say is an ideal school? And I'd say, absolutely not. I said, I don't think there's such a thing. I think that there's really highly effective and successful parts of programs, or features might be a way of saying it, in many schools to be learned from and studied. There's no such thing as the perfect dancer, the perfect athlete. Sometimes they have really good performances, but they're all a little different from one another, aren't they? Mm-hmm. So you might admire, I don't know what sport to use, whatever. Maybe it's in tennis or something, and you really admire somebody's backstroke, or you really admire their serve, and they tend to be a really good performer, but you wouldn't say they're ideal. I think the key here is that schools that are very specifically designed for a specific constituency are going to be a lot more effective than trying to do something generic, because all schools are different. I have never been to two schools that are identical. It's just not possible. There's always this amazing human mix of the teachers who work there, their personalities, their talent, their experience, or their lack of. Sometimes the lack of experience isn't so bad. I mean, you see it all, and then you have student populations that vary every year. You know, it's amazing. It's moving to me. And I've seen amazing environments on a shoestring. It isn't money. In fact, sometimes schools with a lot of money, they don't use it very well. I mean, and some do. I mean, it's a real fascinating field to be in. It continues to be relentlessly fascinating to me. So I wouldn't say there's ideal, but I would say study to find features that can inform your own work. That's a good idea, I think, to do. And so.
Dr. Jacobs, thank you so much for tonight. I think all of our podcasts, I'm always like, I'm learning so much. This is so awesome. But tonight, was just extra amazing.
Oh, you're very kind.
And my mind feels blown, and I'm just looking forward to spending some quality time with your website and continuing to explore these ideas more. So thank you so much.
Have a good one.
Okay, and good night. We'll see you. Join us again on January 22nd for FBA Part 2, everyone. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.